Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of our Podium Picks. Sean Woodland and Tommy Marquez. Last week, Tommy, it was cereal. We got quite the response on that episode.
Hotly contested.
Yes, there was some people who were unhappy about some omissions that we had made, but hey, it was our list. It was our Podium Picks. You guys are entitled to yours, but I'm glad that it sparked some conversation.
Yep.
We're going back to the CrossFit realm. With this edition, we're going to be ranking our mind-blowing moments from the CrossFit Games. So these are individual performances that made us go, whoa. And you have to consider context. You know, we took that into account. It's not necessarily about like you won the event. It's more about like, I can't believe that person just pulled that off.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we're going. We're going to do Dark Horse, Spirit of the Games, and then 3, 2, and 1. And I think you started last week. So I will start this week, and I will start with my Dark Horse and then my Spirit of the Games. Okay. So right off the bat, my Dark Horse, and I think this is an appropriate pick for a Dark Horse.
Yeah.
Because it's not an athlete. I mean, he's very athletic.
Yeah.
Very fit, but he was not a competitor at the CrossFit Games in 2016. He was a cameraman. I'm going to go with Marston Sawyers on the suicide sprint in 2016, holding the gimbal camera, I believe it's called, and outrunning pretty much the entire field on the last lap down there, to the finish line. He got a lot of attention on social media, and rightfully so, and that video still pops up every now and then. Marston Sawyers, while running with a camera, managing to outsprint some very fit athletes in 2016. So that is my Dark Horse right there.
It was like a heavy camera rig
that
too,
thing
with a red.
Wasn't light. Yeah. So he was cooking. So good job, Mars. Dark Horse moment. So now for my Spirit of the Games. And this one, I think this one has some iconic imagery that goes along with it. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go with Chris Spieler on the dog sled in 2011. And I actually talked to him about this moment, and he was saying how it was the first year of the nanos.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, like, I remember I just gotten these nanos and I put them on, I'd been wearing them, and I put my shoulder against that sled and the thing didn't move. And he's like, my first reaction was, these shoes suck. He's like, they're not getting any traction. He's like, obviously that wasn't the case. And he goes, but I had to find any way to move this thing. He's like, and it was going to happen come hell or high water. And so he basically leans over with his head almost to the floor and finds a way to get that sled to move. And he said he felt bad for Pat Barber, because I think Barber was the guy who actually won that heat, and Spieler got the loudest cheers because he was moving that sled. And that was one of those, I think, iconic moments it sums up who Chris Spieler was. That's why he was so relatable, is because we've all had that moment where, like, there's no way we're going to do this. We got to find a way. And Chris embodied that, because everyone's either been told that you're too small, too old, too slow, too this. And Chris was all of that. Mm-hmm. And everyone got behind him in that moment. We all felt like we all empathized with what he was going through out there. And it was one of those events, one of those moments that as a spectator, I will never forget.
Yeah.
Those are my Dark Horse and Spirit of the Games winners.
Those are some good ones.
Thank you.
I have that exact photo of Spieler in my head. You couldn't have this list without Spiel being on it.
Correct.
In some way. He embodies this.
Mm-hmm.
So my Dark Horse is Sam Briggs on the Ranch Trail Run in 2016.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that.
Sam Briggs is another one of those athletes that just pulls performances where she's not just the best at it, but she's light years ahead,
mm-hmm.
ahead of her competition. There's some old non-sanctioned events that I witnessed her compete at that just blew people away. But at the Ranch Trail Run, you remember the Games went back to the ranch in 2016, mm-hmm. back to their home, and they did an iteration of the trail run that they did back in the day.
Right.
And it finished on the road that leads up to the ranch in a sprint towards the finish. Sam Briggs won that event for the women, but she didn't just win that event. She beat all but about 3 male athletes as well.
And then there's that great shot of her chasing down Brent Fikowski at the finish line. That was
photo,
awesome,
right? Of Sam getting into Terminator mode and sprinting towards the finish. And then all of a sudden, here comes Brent Forrest Gump Fikowski, high elbowing it.
I was running, hey.
And she just blows right by him. Peace player. And,
mm-hmm.
That's another moment that sticks out.
I like that one a lot. That's a good pick.
Yeah. And to me, that was just I loved it. That embodies Sam Briggs as a competitor.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't care who you are. If she's got you in her crosshairs,
yeah, you going down, player.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. My spirit of the games, similar like context is what you had, but it's Cody Anderson in the 2014.
Yeah, the good one. I really love that moment.
And I'll keep the description short here, but Cody is one of the smaller athletes like Spieler, and it was the second round of the clean ladder, which I believe finished at 325.
That sounds correct.
Yeah, I think it was 325 was the final bar.
Mm-hmm.
And it was Cody's first year at the games.
Yep.
And it was one of
Didn't
those.
he do really well in the muscle up biathlon that year too? Like that was
yes,
his,
he won.
Yeah,
he won
that. I think.
Yeah, he won that. He was unbroken. The only one to stay unbroken. And he kind of, got people's attention there, and then he steps up to the clean ladder, and everyone sees this small, 150, 160 pounds soaking wet kid step up to was basically double his body weight. And I strongly believe that he stood that up in conjunction with the crowd energy.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Like that was when sound had an effect on what was going, it's like it actually, I think the cheers actually got under the weight and lifted it a little bit. So those are two good ones, man.
Yeah. Those are
all right. So now let's get down to the nitty gritty. Let's get down to the podium itself, and we'll start with third place. I will go with my third place pick. My third place pick is relatively recent, and it is in 2018. It is on the Chaos event. And this was, I didn't notice it the first time I saw it, but when it was pointed out to me, I went, what? That actually happened? This was Amanda Barnhart on the slug in 2018. So she didn't win the event, and she was one of the, I think there were quite a few people who were pulling the slug when Amanda got to hers. So Amanda gets to the slug and proceeds to pull it like it was empty and passed, I think, like 7 or 8 people in the process, almost as if they were standing still. And when we did the event live, like I said, I didn't notice it because there were other things that were going on that we needed to call. She was not a focus of the event. But a month later, when we started working on the post-production shows, I remember I'm sitting there, we were voicing something or writing something, and Charlie Doobie, our producer, walked into our edit booth where we were. He's like, hey man, you got to check this out. He's like, look at this. You guys are doing Chaos? I'm like, yeah. He goes, look at Amanda Barnhart. Look where she is right now. I said, okay. He goes, watch this. And he hits play, and she just like sprinted with this thing. And it was an unbelievable individual effort. And unfortunately, live, we didn't give her the credit for it, but go back and watch the end of that event and just count the amount of people that she passes. So that is my third place podium pick.
It's like in Space Invaders, when you're shooting at the guys, and there's always that one alien that branches off from the collective and just like starts coming down at you like way faster than everyone. That's what it felt like.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, she's there in the outside lane, just trucking.
Yes. It was, I honestly thought that her slug was empty.
Oh man. And she's crushing it. It was kind of one of those coming out moments for her as an athlete.
Okay. Third place, Tom.
My third place is Elizabeth Akinwale on the Killer Cage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So in 2011, there was an event called the Killer Cage.
I remember it was spectacular.
The first and only time the monkey bars showed up at the event. After a round or two, the big question was like, are people going to go down and turn around and come back? Or are they going to hop down and come back? And up until that point, nobody had actually stayed on the monkey bars for the entire turnaround. And then here comes Elizabeth, her first year at the games as well. Obviously would go on to qualify multiple times. Be one of the top athletes down the pull-up bars, and like doesn't let go and swings and turns her hand. I specifically remember just seeing her hand flip around and catch the bar the other way.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't Dan Bailey employ the same technique in that event?
I think so, but
I think he saw it after he saw her do it, right?
But I think he had to come down on the last one.
Okay.
I think he had to come down at one point. Maybe not, but she was definitely the first. And I remember there was an audible from the crowd. And
I was in the crowd for that event, and I was one of those people doing that. Yeah.
And everybody's like, "Oh man!" And like basically like saying, and for some, it was kind of silly in retrospect to think that nobody could do it. But it was like one of those things where like, it's like the the Prefontaine effect, right? Like
Right.
nobody thought the 4-minute mile was possible, but once someone did it, then suddenly that threshold was broken and
Right.
people started to be able to do it. And that's what Elizabeth did in that event. And she goes on to win that event too. And that was like the big, like, shining moment for her. And we played that replay over.
It was awesome.
Over in that highlight. That was when I was like, oh man, she's a beast.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's awesome.
Okay. Second place now. I will begin with second place. And this is one that you have already mentioned, but I put it at second place because I just remember it just so clearly in my mind, the camera angle that we had and the crowd and the whole 9 yards. This is Cody Anderson on that lift in 2014. And I remember we had the shot, I think it was behind him, where you could see the crowd. And as he gets under it and catches it, everybody is like starts getting to their feet, or the crowd starts to come up as one, and the volume comes up, and he stands that thing up, and then he gets across the finish line. And the reaction to that, and he didn't win the event, obviously. I think he was the last guy across the finish line. But I remember thinking when he stepped up, like, how much time until we hit the cap? Because we're going to be here a while, because this ain't going up. But it was one of those moments too that I think really hammered home just how special the tennis stadium is, and how that brought out the best in people, and how the crowd, like you said, could have an effect on an event in that setting. And, Cody had no business making that lift.
Yeah.
And to watch him hit that under those circumstances it's just that I will never forget that image that we saw of it. And it was just a special moment just to see someone do something like there is no way this is going to happen.
Yeah.
And then, what?
And now he's smashing weights.
Yeah.
This
got some strong.
Oh man.
Okay. Second place for you.
My second place is from the very first CrossFit Games at the StubHub Center.
Okay.
Which was then called the Home Depot Center, because sponsorships. It was the very first event there. It was Amanda. So obviously named in honor of Amanda Miller, a 2009 Games athlete that unfortunately passed away due to cancer. At the time, muscle ups weren't something that people just had in the bag all the time. Every Games athlete was expected to have them at that point in time, but repping them out, was tough. And a 135 pounds full snatch 4 reps was considered a very high skill and somewhat heavy event. And coming off in 2009, Chris Spieler finished 25th at the Games. It was his worst finish ever. 2007, he, was in the hunt for the Games. I believe he podiumed that year. 2008, going into the final event, was in first place. Looked like he was going to win. Unfortunately, didn't. 2009 didn't perform quite to what we expected. Finished 25th. Ultimately ended up getting cut. Coming into 2010, I think just had something, maybe didn't have something to prove personally, but it felt like that. And he comes out and he wins Amanda in a fashion where it was like the skill and the strength and the technique. And at the time, I think Spieler probably weighed 135. Yeah. So he was snatching body weight, 4 reps at a time when that wasn't common, at least in the sport. And watching him outlift, because at the time there were athletes like Kalipa and these other guys that were going rep for rep from him in the early rounds. And then suddenly we started seeing, Hackenbrook fall off, Froning fall off, who we didn't know was a big deal at the time. Kalipa starts failing squat snatch reps. He almost kills the camera guy on the gym. It destroys the most expensive camera CrossFit had employed to date. And one by one, Spieler just reps it out, doesn't miss a rep, I don't think, and wins Amanda. And it was one of those, like, Spieler isn't human.
Yeah.
Like the opening event, high rep muscle ups, but then the squat snatch to outlift all of these just bruisers he was in a heat with, like the Rob Orlandos of the world, was just like unreal. Yeah. And he did it, and he made it look, and when Spieler, that was the best thing about him. He always made it look so effortless that it was like, how is this guy doing this? Yeah. And it was one of my first Games memories, and it's one of my favorites. There's a funny story about that event. I was talking to Austin Malaiolo about it. A lot of the athletes, that was the first time that they had to do a muscle up without a false grip, because the rings were so high that they couldn't jump up and get a good false grip. So they had to learn basically back while they were warming up how to do a muscle up without a false grip. So if you watch some of the athletes, that's like, they're just
the first time they've ever done that.
Yeah.
So I didn't know that. I thought that it was kind of common knowledge at that point, but it's not.
And if you see some of the early heats,
Mhm.
there are people that
People failing them. Yeah.
Yeah, there were a couple of women that couldn't do muscle ups,
Mhm.
and there was like a bunch of dudes that were just failing them at,
Right.
after a couple of rounds, which was it'd be insane now.
Oh, yeah, no question. All right, so this brings us to first place, and I think we can both jump in here because it's looking like we have both picked the same one.
Yes.
So in 2016, there was a little event called the Suicide Sprint. I've already referenced it in my dark horse pick. Was Marston Sawyer's.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why we may not have seen Marston do that live is because we were all focused on what Matt Fraser was doing. And going into that event, just for some context, Matt had a pretty good lead going in, and there's like 3 back-to-back events that were all worth 50 points. It was the handstand walk, the Suicide Sprint, and the plow, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And we're thinking, all right, all he has to do is just finish middle of the pack here. He's going to be fine. The sprint, it's not his event because last year in the sprint event, he was like 33rd or something, one of his worst finishes ever at the games. So he's not going to do well at that event and just damage control this, and he'll be just fine going into the rest of the events. I think he won the handstand walk or was close to the top. I mean, he was close to the top in the first 2, and the sprint was the sprint the last one.
The plow was the last.
Plow was the last one,
but the Suicide Sprint was second, and he finished second in the handstand.
Right,
walk.
so he's already finished second. So all right, fine. He didn't need to do that, but now this is where he comes back down to earth, and the event starts, and he's middle of the pack. Like they go down, back, and now on the final trip back, this is one of the few times in my life where I haven't called a ton of events, but when I was calling it, I forgot that I was a broadcaster and I became a fan, because when he passes, I think it was Ben Smith, for that moment for me, I knew right then and there that this guy is going to be unbeatable for a while, because if he took a weakness that was that glaring and is now winning his heat, how much better can he get in the stuff that he is already good at? And the reaction that I had was the genuine, just the unscripted reaction that I had to watching that event. And I could not believe what I had just witnessed from him.
Yeah. I agree wholeheartedly. And to kind of pump your tires up a little, it's one of the greatest calls in CrossFit Games history.
Thank you. I do appreciate that.
You can't separate the moment from your call, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, because and I think it adds value to it is the fact that you felt like a fan and not a sportscaster in that moment, because I think what came out was genuine, and it was an absolute reflection of what everybody was feeling at this point, and it speaks to volumes to the athlete and person that Matt Fraser is, that what was effectively the nail in the coffin for his championship the previous year in the wrong way, the sprints where he took 24th and his worst event finish ever, 37th, was effectively the nail in the coffin for his championship win the following year.
Right.
I remember at the time, everyone's still like, man, like, is there a chance, Ben? Like, Ben has to make a move here. Ben is good at sprinting. He's probably going to be top 5. And then all of a sudden, and because of Marston's effort as a camera guy, we have that amazing tracking shot where you see him pull away and you hear just Sean's booming voice. What can't this guy do?
I think when I said that, I was like doing the unbelievable Cobra, like that in the booth, and Bill was. We were all just like, "What did we just watch?" Like, that was insane, and that is where I think it was Mark Messier, who former NHL player, Oilers, Rangers, won multiple Stanley Cups, who said you have to take away your opponent's will to compete, and I think that was the very moment where you saw Matt just like reach in and just pull out the will to compete of every other athlete, being like, you ain't going to beat me. You thought this was your chance. You're not beating me in this, and you're not beating me in anything else.
And I think that's where the legend of Matt Fraser as this unstoppable force was born. I think that's one where he crushed everyone for the next few years.
Yeah,
everyone's
exactly.
just like, I cannot beat this guy. He goes on to win. Obviously, I like, seriously, I have your call playing on loop in my head right now. And I don't think it's a coincidence that, there were reports of 4 immaculate conceptions in the greater Los Angeles area that time, because, there was just some magic happening that on the field that day. And it's one of the all-time highlights, I think, in CrossFit Games history, because it is we talk about, and we've said it before, like, athletes have a Heisman moment, in college football, there's that moment that perfectly encapsulates their season and their effort as an athlete. And this was that for Matt. And what was, at the time we didn't know how many, but was the first of now has been 4. And really that was the moment that like sparked what could be an unprecedented, all-time great run in the sport. And
yeah, that's when you knew like this guy's going to be special for a long time.
Yeah.
It's just, but yeah, it's a great event and one that I will never forget. So those are our podium picks for our mind-blowing moments at the CrossFit Games. We'll have to do this for like regionals and stuff too. That'd be fun.
There's some good ones.
Yeah, definitely. But we would love to hear what yours are. So hit us up in the comments on Instagram or direct messages, comments on YouTube. This will be up there as well. So yeah, what are your mind-blowing moments from the games and why? Listen, we had a lot of people tell us why Cinnamon Toast Crunch deserved to be on our list, and it wasn't. So if there's one we missed, make a case for it. Maybe, we'll bring it up. Were there some that, what are some that you just remember that didn't make the list?
Ooh. Let's see. The dog sled was definitely on my short list. It wasn't a singular effort, but Kalipa, how he started the 2013 games.
I thought about that
with the marathon rows, the short row,
and then the burden run.
The burden run, he won 3 straight to open up the competition. That was like, for me, all 3 of those to some extent were endurance-based workouts, and that kind of changed. I think that reframed how people viewed endurance and running work in the sport. I think that was a paradigm shifter because
that was like the first year he was working with Hinshaw too, wasn't it? Yeah,
and Garrett Fisher was also working with him, and that was like the springboard for his 5th place finish. And everyone was like, "Whoa, what is Kalipa doing here? This is the guy we saw almost die at the Ranch Trail Run in 2009.
Yeah,
how is he doing this now?" And that was, that was a big one.
For me, it was Josh Bridges on push pull.
Yes,
that was awesome. The fact that he stared down Froning in that event, especially at the end, and was able to win, and then the iconic celebration that almost made it. But yeah,
there's a handful of Josh Bridges one, 2007 legless or some good ones. I'm trying to think. There's a couple of small individual performances. I think of Annie Thorsdottir on the handstand walk. In 2011, there was a skills test. And people were this was Annie's first year. And Annie was obviously like this taller, longer athlete relative to some of the fields. Remember her biggest competitor at the time was Kristen Clever, who's like the exact opposite athlete in terms of size and shape. And to see the skill from Annie in the handstand walk at the time was one of those, whoa. I think she walked the furthest of any athlete. It was either her or Elizabeth.
Well, I know Rich Froning went like 50 yards, and that was like that. This guy walked 50 yards on his hands. This is impossible. No one's ever done that before. And now you do it all the time.
Yeah. And that was one of those ones where I think it shifted. Like, there's a handful of events where the men and women compete on a level playing field in terms of the tasks that's asked of them, and the women outperform the men. And that was one where I was like, oh my gosh, that's insane. And that ended up being, a big piece of her winning. I'm trying to think. There's a couple other. I'm trying to think.
I know someone's going to bring one up that we're gonna be like, oh, how do we forget about that one?
Cody Anderson in the muscle up clean couplet at 2018.
Yeah,
when he finished that, and I've told this story before. He was in a heat with like Tim Paulson, I think, and George Sanchez, these heavy hitters, and they were all talking about how they couldn't finish it. And they're like, oh, how far did you get, Cody? And he's like, oh, I finished it. And they're like, what? like this small guy that didn't that finished all those barbells. I feel like Val Vorbel in general.
Yeah,
is I would agree with that
too.
Yeah. You just can't kill her.
No. There've been some good ones, man. There've been some really cool moments, and hopefully we're gonna get more of them.
Yes.
So let us know what you guys think. Thanks for listening to this week's edition of Podium Picks. For Tommy Marquez, I'm Sean Woodland, and we'll be back next week with more Podium Picks.